Welcome to the Tech Talks by Microsoft EMEA. My name is Manfred Helber and our topic today is Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, including a live demo. So the Tech Talks are presented to you on Monday, 12 p.m. Central Eastern Time. And usually we have live demos like today, and we have a specific topic. And today we have two major topics. It's Azure Virtual Desktop and the special integration on the Azure Stack HCI operating system. Let's start to talk a little bit about Azure Virtual Desktop. Azure Virtual Desktop is a service previously named Windows Virtual Desktop. It was renamed at the beginning of last year. And the Azure Virtual Desktop, and thanks for the feedback about the picture and audio quality on YouTube. And for sure, you can use the chat to ask your questions about the topic. So Azure Virtual Desktop is available in Azure since several years. Previously, it was Windows Virtual Desktop. When we look at the components of Azure Virtual Desktop, the architecture is very similar to what we know from traditional remote desktop services implementations on premises. We have our clients. The clients can be Windows clients, but also other OS that are used to access the Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure. The Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure is Microsoft managed, and this is the advantage. We don't have to care about the configuration in detail about the web access and the broker and the gateway, the diagnostic settings. Everything is deployed when we onboard Azure Virtual Desktop. The desktops or the applications are provided in the Azure Data Center in Azure Virtual Desktop, so in the traditional Azure Virtual Desktop. So we can publish desktops or apps to our users. So the application streaming is possible. When we publish full desktops, we can publish them based on Windows Server operating systems or Windows Client operating systems. When we use Windows Client operating systems, we have two choices. Option one is to use dedicated desktops per user. Option two is to have a multi-session configuration, and this is unique to Azure Virtual Desktop because the Windows 10 and Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session is only available in the Azure data centers. So when we are thinking about authentication, we can use the Azure Active Directory or a hybrid deployment with Azure Active Directory and on-premises Active Directory. The great thing about this topic is that we have on the desktops, when we're using Windows 10 or Windows 11 multi-session, the full support for the Microsoft 365 apps. So because Windows 11 is fully supported and there's actually no end date communicated for the support of the Microsoft 365 apps. So it's a great alternate option to the traditional remote desktop services on premises where we must use Windows Server as a platform, where we have the situation that the Microsoft 365 apps are actually not supported in this combination. For sure, we can run a downgrade to the previous version, but the recommendation is to use Windows 11 as a platform. When we look at the single components on Azure Virtual Desktop, then we have our workspaces. So the workspaces include or consist of the application groups. Then we have the host pools. The host pools provide the resources from the session hosts. We have the published applications or desktops, and for authentication, we are using our Azure Active Directory or the local Active Directory. So 7 major components we see here that work together. So Azure Virtual Desktop is available, as I mentioned, in Azure. The interesting thing is to bring it to Azure Stack HCI. So let's talk a little bit about Azure Stack HCI. Azure Stack HCI is the hyperconverged infrastructure operating system from Microsoft. When we look at an hyperconverged infrastructure, that advantage is that we don't use a traditional stack with switches, network appliances, storage fabric, and SAN systems, But we are using industry standard servers with a powerful hyperconverged infrastructure software solution that provides high availability, scalability, um, resiliency, and in Azure Stack HCI, not only the hyperconverged infrastructure part, but also Azure, because Azure Stack HCI brings Azure to your on-premises data center. Azure Stack HCI can start small. The traditional minimum Azure Stack HCI cluster deployment was with 2 servers. So this was the initial footprint till beginning of this year, where we could start. New since a few weeks is the option to start with a single server. The single server has the advantage. We have the Azure Stack HCI OS on the server. Hyper-V is included. We're using storage spaces direct. We have all the Azure benefits, and we can extend it later. So it's a single node cluster. You can configure something like this. You could configure something like this in Windows Server, single node clusters for testing. For sure, we don't have server redundancy in this configuration because we only have one server, but we have disk redundancy. So we are building a local redundant storage. It's expandable. We can add servers later, and it brings all the Azure benefits. So when we are talking about the benefits, and one of the best benefits is Azure Virtual Desktop, then the important thing is we can bring Azure Virtual Desktop also to this single server solution, to this single node configuration here. So all the features are there, including Azure Virtual Desktop, but important to know is about Azure Virtual Desktop. This is a preview today, so it's not released finally. It works great, so I absolutely recommend you to test this, to try the experience in your own environment. Where we don't have an answer today is for the pricing. So what will Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI cost? We know about the pricing of Azure Stack HCI. It's $10 per physical core per month. For Azure Virtual Desktop, we don't know exactly what the virtual CPUs of the virtual desktop machines will cost. But as soon as this published, we will also communicate this in one of the next Tech Talks. So Azure Stack HCI is scalable with up to 16 nodes. If you are not looking for an entry solution with 1 or 2 nodes or 3 or 4 nodes, but you want to know what is the maximum scalability. Maximum scalability is 16 nodes. When we have a look at the Azure Virtual Desktop architecture later, then we can see our virtual desktop hosts can run on different clusters. So it would also be possible to have multiple of these 16 node clusters if you have a virtual desktop implementation at a very, very high scale. The hypervisor I mentioned is Hyper-V. This is part of Azure Stack HCI. And for sure, we have full redundancy. Full redundancy for the cache, full redundancy for the data when we are running 2 or more servers. When we are running the single node deployment, then we have the situation that we have redundancy for the local drives. There are different drive types supported. For the single node deployment, only full flash configurations with NVMEs only, with SSDs only, or with persistent memory only. Important is to understand that Azure Stack HCI is installed on our hardware on premises. It's a physical host operating system. It's installed locally. It runs locally. And from the user experience, it looks like a server core installation. Let's have a look at such a configuration in my environment. We will have a look at Azure Virtual Desktop on these machines here. So let's connect to such an Azure Stack HCI cluster. This cluster here, the Azure Stack HCI cluster 101. When we look at the servers here, we can see this cluster has installed or uses the servers 126 and 127. And now I could directly connect to one of these servers. So I'm now accessing one of these servers here, the 126. I have to re-authenticate because this is a new session. What we are using here is Windows Admin Center. And I want to use these credentials for all the sessions. I'm on the first node of my cluster. And when I connect to this cluster via remote desktop, let's do it this way, remote desktop connectivity to this cluster, then I have to authenticate again. This is always in the remote desktop and in the PowerShell remote connections to ensure that you are a valid user. And now when we look here, you can see, oh, this is a server core installation. Here we have the Azure Stack HCI operating system. We have our text-based menu for configuration, domain workgroup, computer name, and so on. But it is locally installed. There's no full graphical user interface for Azure Stack HCI. And the Azure Stack HCI OS is fully managed with the Windows Admin Center. We have seen the access to one of the servers. In my configuration, we have a 2-node cluster. I have some performance values here. I can manage the volumes in this cluster, can create new volumes, can extend volumes. I can manage my drives on this cluster. So see if they are all healthy, if they are up and running. I can decide, for example, for grouping them by server to see how they are located in the systems. And we have the situation, it's an Azure Stack HCI operating system. So I can go to the settings and see if this cluster is connected to Azure. We can see, yes, this cluster is connected to Azure. It's registered. The connection was successful. It was today successful in the morning. And the Azure Arc integration, from a technical perspective, this is optional, but in Azure Stack HCI 21 H2, it's mandatory. It's configured automatically. It's also enabled. So my cluster is connected to Azure and it's available in Azure. This results in that Azure has the billing information for this cluster because my cores are uploaded to Azure. It's not required to have a permanent internet connection. For sure, when I use Azure services for authentication and things like this, I need internet connectivity because otherwise this will not work. But my cluster, my local resources, they are still up and running, even if my internet connection is disconnected. So the cores are uploaded for the billing of the Azure Stack HCI operating system. I mentioned it's $10 per physical core per month. It's a subscription. The advantage is that I will receive new versions automatically. They are provided via the update mechanism in the Windows Admin Center. And the great thing about Azure Stack HCI is that it's not only an hyperconverged infrastructure operating system for on-premises, but it's also Microsoft Azure in my on-premises. This is great, and we should try to understand this. So when I go to the Windows Admin Center Management console again and click on View Azure Resource, a new tab will open that brings me to the Azure portal. And here I can see, okay, this is my Azure Stack HCI cluster 101. I have my 2 hosts. And now I can see I have the cluster here in the Windows Admin Center locally installed for management. And I have also access to my resources in this cluster via the Azure portal. And we can bring additional Azure services and workloads to this Azure Stack HCI cluster. And this is the big advantage because Microsoft announced already 2 years ago that Azure Stack HCI will first get Azure management and governance. These are things like Azure Monitor, management via the Windows Admin Center, auto-manage what is actually in private preview, disaster recovery, PowerShell, and so on. But Azure Stack HCI will also receive Azure Infrastructure Innovations. These are things like kernel soft reboot, so for an ultra-fast reboot after patching a server node. GPU support also for clustered VMs, dynamic CPU compatibility in clusters, thin provisioning for volumes, network ATC for an advanced technical configuration for network interface cards, and secured core PC for enhanced security capabilities. And this is the third part. Azure Stack HCI will also receive Azure workloads and benefits. This means we have extended security updates on Windows Server. We have, and this has to be updated here, we already have the Azure edition of Windows Server. It's not coming soon. It's already available here. So the Azure edition of Windows Server, the extended security updates, the pay-as-you-go subscription, the Azure Kubernetes services, and actually in preview, Azure Virtual Desktop. And this is where we want to have a detailed look on it, how Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI works, how it feels for the user, and how you can implement it on your Azure Stack HCI configuration. Before we start with the big live demo about this topic, let's talk a few more minutes about the Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI. We have seen the architecture of Azure Virtual Desktop. And for Azure Stack HCI, it's exactly the same, but the difference is that the virtual machines for the desktops and the apps don't run in Azure, but they run on the Azure Stack HCI operating system. So this here is the big difference. We have the same client compatibility with Windows and other operating systems. I'm using in my live demo the browser-based client, and I'm often asked, is it only possible to access via the web browser? No, but it's the easiest way in my live demo. I don't have to install applications, download things. I only can use my web browser in a new private browsing session and connect to this environment. This is also possible via the Windows app, via the Android and iOS app, and via the desktop application you can use for remote desktop services. It's RDP we are using here, the remote desktop protocol. Also, the Azure Virtual Desktop management components are similar to what we are using in traditional Azure Virtual Desktop. And it's provided by Azure. So here we have the Azure part, the web access, the broker, the diagnostics, the gateway, the Azure SQL database for all the information we have in our configuration. And the unique thing is that we have the desktops and the apps on premises. So this third part here, this is exactly what runs on premises, what we have available on our Azure Stack HCI cluster. Now we want to have a detailed look on this configuration. Before we start to talk about how to configure this, how to bring this to your environment, I will show you how the Azure Virtual Desktop feels, how it works, how the user feels it. What I will use is a new in private browsing session, and I will access this URL you can see here. So I mentioned is one of the options to use the web-based access here. I will authenticate with a user, it's mh@manfredhelber.de. This is my environment, this is my demo user. I have a password. And I don't want to stay signed in because this is only in private session on my machine here. So I can see this user has actually 4 different virtual desktops you can access. There are 2 virtual desktop provided. No, sorry. One is provided by AVD new S01. It's an Azure Virtual Desktop connection. Then we have the Azure Virtual Desktop Workspace 01. Then we have the HCI Azure Virtual Desktop Workspace 01 and the HCI Azure Stack Virtual Desktop Workspace 01. So here we have 2 sessions. So these are 2 different, but we have 2 session desktops that are provided for this user. So as you can see, a single user, so the user Manfred, can use desktops in Azure and on Azure Stack HCI. And if there are additional resources or targets, they are also visible here. So let's have a look at the infrastructure before we connect, because here we have our Windows Admin Center. And in the Windows Admin Center, I have also access on my Azure Stack HCI cluster to my virtual machines. So these virtual machines here, I will see in the list. Are configured in my environment. They are running locally. And this machine, Win11 AVD VM01, is my Azure Virtual Desktop target VM. I can have several of them. I can configure them for scale out. I can configure them that they first scale into the depth, so bring additional sessions to each desktop. I have only one of the machines. We can see here it's a little bit more powerful, 16 virtual processors, 32 gigabytes of memory. It depends on the number of sessions you want to bring to exactly this session host, which resources you will need. And for sure, this is my local Windows Admin Center, so I should be able to connect to this machine. Let's try this out. I will go to the machine, and I want to connect to this virtual machine. From the naming, we can see it's in Windows 11. Let's connect to this virtual machine here directly via the Windows Admin Center. I have a password for mhdemolab/administrator. And I want to connect to this machine. Here you can see, okay, I'm connected, but I have to authenticate here. So the first step was the connection to the machine. Now I have to authenticate. It's mhdemolab administrator, and I have a password. So there's a missing backslash. Sorry, I have here my keyboard layout lab. So mhdemolab. It's an, sorry, why is there no backslash? I can use it in this way. I'm not sure what's going wrong here because I have a mix between German. Let's do it this way. It's mhdemolab.de and my password. So I'm authenticating with a user on this machine. So this is not Azure Virtual Desktop here. This is a connectivity to my local virtual machine I have running here. But I want to connect here to see what's running on this machine. When I'm looking at the settings of this machine, I can see this operating system I'm using here. It's Windows 11. Let's go to the information of this machine, about, and we will see, oh, this is a specific edition of Windows. The naming is here, Win11 AVD VM01, and the edition is Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session. And this multi-session here is the unique thing because this is only available in AVD or via AVD. So this means in Azure and in Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, also on premises. So this is a unique thing. We don't have an SKU and we don't have a stock keeping unit for this product. You can buy in a store or can buy via volume license. It's exclusive available for Azure Virtual Desktop. So let's have a little bit more looks at this configuration here. It's part of my local domain. When I go to the File Explorer, I can have a look at this PC and we can see, oh, there are several demo ordners, folders here, demo 01, demo 02, and so on. And let's now check what happens when I connect via user session. So I want to connect with my user here via the session desktop. So now I'm accessing from externally. Till now, I've shown you the infrastructure on my cluster. We connected via the Windows Admin Center. Now we are connected via client.wvd.microsoft.com. WVD, I mentioned this, the previous name for Azure Virtual Desktop was Windows Virtual Desktop. Now it's Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, so let's connect to this machine here. We can have access to clipboard, file transfer, printer. I'm often asked about the capabilities. The capabilities depend on the client. The web-based client is the most flexible, but it's the most limited version. The full desktop client has the most capabilities, including multi-screen support, including full pen and touch support, and much, much more. So I click on Allow. I want to have the connectivity or access to these resources because my local host is not part of this demo environment. I have to authenticate again. If you're running everything in the same connected environment, you can also trust on single sign-on. Now I'm connecting with a user session. Now we can see I have a Windows desktop here. So Windows desktop, let's go to the settings to check some information about the machine. If you remember the name I've shown you, the name of my virtual machine was Win11 AVDVM01. This is exactly the name here in this session. Let's go to the about information. You can see, oh, this machine is part of my mhdemolab.de domain. This is exactly the CPU we have seen. It's the 32 gigabytes of memory. It's the Windows 11 multi-session machine here. So now let's go a little bit further. Let's go to the Windows Explorer. Let's go to this PC and to the C drive. And now let's have a look here. You can see, for example, I want to delete some folders. This one, for example, we'll see it is removed here. I can create a new folder, the demo 03. You can see it happens exactly on this machine here, the demo 03 folder here. So I now have access to my local environment, and we could, for example, see how does it work. Let's go to, let's take the Edge browser here, for example, and let's go to something like youtube.com. It's not personalized here, so let's search for Manfred Helber. And this is now live here, so we can watch to the Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI. We have some delay here based on the streaming technology, but as you can see, it's a smooth live streaming. So we don't have artifacts here or things like this. So Even video works fine in this sessions here. So if I switch now to a larger video screen and yeah, show you hands off here, you can see this is without an additional delay. It's work like you expect it from your local environment. So it's great. For sure, I gave this machine some resources. We have seen 16 virtual CPUs. We have seen the 32 gigabytes of memory, because I have configured this machine to provide up to 5 sessions where I expect session experience without any delays and limitations, even when I'm using video streaming. As I mentioned in the Azure benefits, we can also provide physical graphic interface cards for these virtualized sessions here, because there's a specific technology. It's called GPU pooling, where you can also provide physical graphic cards for high available virtual machines like this Windows 11 Azure Virtual Desktop machine. So let's have a look at the Azure portal to see how we can get this here. I already have my Azure portal here, and let's go to Azure Virtual Desktop. Azure Virtual Desktop, we can search for it, or I have it in my previously visited pages here. Let's first go to the host pools. We can see I have several host pools here from previous live demos. This one here is the host pool where we are actually working in, the HCI AVD pool. I can create a new host pool here. So I could say, okay, I have an HCI, I have the Azure sponsorship, I have a new resource group. Let's create a new resource group. It's the HCI resource group 01. Okay. I have the host pool name HCI. I want to use the same host pool name, and I don't remember the previous name, so let's look it up again. It was the HCI AVD pool 04, HCI AVD pool 04. For sure, I want to have it in my region. I'm choosing West Europe. It's not a validation environment. In a validation environment, you always have to approve changes before they go live. It's great for testing. It's great for an environment where you're changing many things and where you don't want to have all the changes immediately published. The host pool type, it's I can choose between personal and pooled. Personal means dedicated VM per user. Dedicated VM per user or session. Pooled means several users or sessions share VM. This is what we usually are using when we are looking for remote desktop services. And this is the advantage we can use with the Windows Enterprise multi-session that's only available for Azure Virtual Desktop. I will choose for the pooled. Then we have an important question, load balancing algorithm. Breadth first or depth first? Depth first. In my example, I've configured a virtual machine with 16 virtual CPUs, 32 gigabytes of memory. Depth first means Azure Virtual Desktop tries to bring as many sessions as I have configured in the session limit to this machine before the next machine is used. Why? Or what are the advantages? The advantages are costs, because Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure is paid, or part of the payment of Azure Virtual Desktop is the number of virtual CPUs of your session machines. We already know that Azure Virtual Desktop on premises is also charged based on the virtual CPUs of the session hosts, but we don't know the price for it today. So depth first means cost optimized, but for sure the first user has best experience. Then when the second user comes, they have to share the resources. It does not mean that the first user has better performance than the second and third and fourth. Every additional user is part of the fair share policy, where Azure Virtual Desktop tries to provide the best resources for every user. Breadth first means that Azure Virtual Desktop first uses additional virtual machines to provide the best user experience for each user. So let's imagine we have a host pool with 4 machines that can scale up to 4 machines. Then the first server will be placed on the first machine. Sorry, the first user will be placed on the first machine, on the first session host desktop. The second user will trigger the start of the second host machine and will deploy it there, and the third on the third one, and so on. And the fifth user will then be located on the first machine again. How many hosts you have and how many sessions you will have per host can be configured here. I have this pooled configuration depth first, 5 sessions per machine. So next step is virtual machines. When we go to the virtual machines, when we want to run Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure, then we decide for, yes, I want to add virtual machines here. But now we know we don't want to add Azure virtual machines because we want to run the virtual machines on our on-premises location. We want to run the virtual machines on Azure on Azure Stack HCI. Then we have the workspace. Do we want to register the desktop app group? We need a workspace, but we can configure this workspace afterwards. The workspace is required for publishing these resources. We have the advanced settings. We have some additional tags, and via preview and create, we can create this new host pool. So let's create this host pool. So we have a question in the chat. How is Windows Update installed, or how are programs installed? This depends on your needs. We have the Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session, and it can be managed via Intune, can be managed manually. You can pre-patch your images. So we have all the management tools available we could use for an traditional virtual machine. So when I install a virtual Windows client machine on Hyper-V manually, then we can use the same management tools we have here also. So we have the full flexibility plus the additional things provided by Azure Virtual Desktop. Okay, your deployment is completed. Everything is there. This is great. So let's have a look at the Azure Virtual Desktop list here. Let's refresh. I have the pool 04 here. And now the question is how to bring session hosts to this pool. When I add session hosts, then I have some basic information, and the next step is to create virtual machines. Add Azure virtual machines, yes or no? I don't want to add Azure virtual machines. I want to use virtual machines on my host. So how to do this? Let's have a look on my Windows Admin Center, and let's have a look at this virtual machine again. So we are still connected to this Windows 11 multi-session machine, the Windows Enterprise multi-session, and we want to have a look at the control panel. And in the control panel, I'm logged in as a local administrator. We have access to the programs, and here we have the programs and features. There we can see there are several agents that are not here by default. Microsoft Edge is there on every modern Windows client. The Azure Connected Machine Agent is there because we have the requirement that the Azure Virtual Desktop VMs are Azure Arc enabled. Then we have the Remote Desktop Services Infrastructure Agent. We have the Remote Desktop Services Infrastructure Geneva Agent. We have the Remote Desktop Services ASXS Network Stack, and we have the Remote Desktop Agent Bootloader plus FS Logix apps. So what happened here? These agents are today must be downloaded manually from the Microsoft web page. We have a great documentation about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI in docs.microsoft.com. There we have the download links for these agents. We have to download them manually today. This could be an automated process in the future. As I mentioned, this is a preview today. We must download these agents, install them on our machine we have planned for Azure Virtual Desktop. If we want to use the Windows 11 multi-session on this machine, we can also download the Windows 11 multi-session image. But keep in mind, this image will only be runnable without limitations on an Azure Stack HCI operating system. You can use the single node, but it's not possible to use a traditional Hyper-V host. And these agents here connect to the Azure Virtual Desktop environment in Azure. So when you connect here, you have to provide the unique keys of your environment we created here actually. And then we will see this machine like we have it here in the host pool 03. I will not have enough time to configure it for the host pool 04, but we can have a look at this host pool 03. And exactly this session host, sorry, no, it's the host pool 01. This was the wrong one. Here in the host pool 01, there we can see exactly this session host. And what's great, you can see we have some status information here. So Azure realized this target host is available. This is the DNS name. I can additional ones. Yeah, I could additional ones from on-premises or from Azure. So I can also mix this if this is required. And in this pool, we have also the application groups. The application group is the component where we define the resources that are published. Let's go to this application group I have configured here. I have one application. This application is my virtual machine. And we have 5 assignments. When I go to manage, this is the important part here because in the assignments, I specify how the machines how the users will be authenticated by the machines. And for this, I have to specify the users. And I can see here, they have all local domain specified here. And this local domain here means that I need an Azure Active Directory configuration with an Azure Active Directory Connect. So this is configured in this environment. The environments are connected, and so these users can be authenticated. So let's go back to the pool. First was to create the pool. Second step was to connect the virtual hosts to the environment via downloading the agents. If you want to use a special exclusive Azure Virtual Desktop OS, you also have to download the OS package. Then you can create the application groups, publish the applications or desktops, and configure the access to this environment here. So this is Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI in easy steps. if you configure it for the first time, you should plan some hours. So when you go through the documentation, between 2 and 4 hours for the complete configuration. We have seen the live demo. The big question is, what is the advantage to have it on premises? We don't know about the costs today. Maybe an advantage could be costs. But a big advantage is to be able to use Azure Virtual Desktop and Azure Stack HCI in combination with short path, because we have the situation that the target host and the client, they are on they can be, it's not a must have, but it can be that the client and the session host are in the same location. Let's imagine you have a company, they have their data center, and you have many users that want to access the virtual desktops from the main office. And the main office is located besides the data center. We have high bandwidth to the data center, we have low latency, but we have the situation that for sure the client first connects via the public internet via Azure to see where the desktop is located. So this is the way the client uses. It connects to the public internet, it connects to the remote desktop services, web, this is what I did, or it uses the client. It validates via the gateway and the broker, or verifies what the target host is. The Azure Active Directory is used for authentication. This was before they connected to the gateway and the broker. And then we have the connect to our session host. But it's not a connect that uses this complicated route through the web, because the client received the information. Oh, dear client, you are on the same network location than your session host. Please use the RDP short path direct connection. And so we have the advantage. Maybe we are connected to the internet via a gigabit internet connection, but we have to our session hosts a direct 10 gigabit connection, low latency or something like this. Another advantage is usually behind the session hosts, we have some file servers that store the user data, that store the profile data, and that are used for accessing files and folders. And for sure, they can also be located here with a direct connectivity to the RDS host. So advantage of Azure Virtual Desktops, or advantages, are it runs on our on-premises, it's in our environment, it's based on our data center architecture. It uses the scalability of Azure. It uses the services and advantages of Azure. It uses, or it's capable to use, RDP short parse to take advantages like low latency, high bandwidth, and direct access to our target servers. Feel free to bring your questions to the chat directly. So if you have questions about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, feel free to bring them to the chat. If you are looking for a documentation, then my recommendation is to have a look at docs.microsoft.com. Here we have detailed information about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI. And in the pricing section, we can read, this is not public today, but we can have a look at the pricing of Azure Virtual Desktop. This is available today. And we can see that the virtual CPUs of the virtual session hosts will be the key for charging Azure Virtual Desktop. This is including some updates and new features we have here. And there's a documentation about how to set up Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, including all the steps you need to configure your environment. So take docs.microsoft.com and the Azure Virtual Desktop documentation for this. So Today, with this Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, we have seen how powerful these Azure benefits for Azure Stack HCI are. But as you can see, Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI is one of many services we have here. Let's see what additional services and additional benefits we have in Azure Virtual Desktop. So, for example, the activation of Windows Server subscription, the Azure Defender and secured core capabilities. We have the Azure Kubernetes services on Azure Stack HCI if you want to provide containerized workloads. We can use the Azure Site Recovery. We have this enhanced GPU support with clustered VMs. I already mentioned this. We can use powerful supports through Azure. This is a big advantage. We have the Azure billing, so no upfront costs when we use the Azure Stack HCI operating system. We have the management through Windows Admin Center. We have this in the Azure portal. We have this powerful native Azure Arc integration. For the on-premises component, HCI, we have the software-defined networking, storage spaces direct, SDDC support. We have the Azure Stack HCI stretch cluster support, and many, many more Azure benefits. So where you can be sure we will see many additional features here, and always for single and for multi-node deployments. So we can see here a footnote that we have some limitations in AKS. When you ever deployed Azure Kubernetes services, then you know that we have several virtual AKS hosts there. In a single node cluster, we have some limitations regarding the resource here. Microsoft is actually working on this, but you can imagine you will not be able to bring the same workload regarding the resources on a single node compared to a 60-node cluster. Also, in a 2-node cluster, you will reach at some point the limitations of this hardware. And this means if you have a specific workload, for sure you have to decide what's the perfect cluster size for it. So I'm really looking forward to more Azure services on Azure Stack HCI. I'm pretty sure we will see several of them this year. We will also see Azure Virtual Desktop this year, I assume so. So because from the technical perspective, if you test it, you will see it's already very, very powerful and it's absolutely stable. It works great. So we had several of these Tech Talk sessions in April, May, and June about different topics. If you want to review them, feel free to go to the YouTube channels from myself, youtube.com/Manfred Helber, or youtube.com/Sven Langenfeld, where we are streaming these sessions, where we are bringing these sessions to. So you can watch them on demand if you, for example, want to know about Windows Server 2012 end of support, if you want to more about Azure Stack HCI, about Windows Server 2022 and Azure Virtual Desktop, is everything there. We will continue the Tech Talks in September. So we have a short summer break, and then we will have additional, sorry, this was wrong. We have the break in July. We will continue the Tech Talks in August. So the best thing is to take a abo on the YouTube channels of Sven Langenfeld and Manfred Helber to stay informed. So if you click on subscribe on our two channels, then you will get an update as soon as the next sessions will be published. So now first the short summer break, but the Tech Talks will continue. Enjoy the on-demand sessions in this time. And after the summer break, we will continue, and you will not miss any session if you subscribe to our channels where you are watching these sessions. So thank you for this feedback. Hopefully you all enjoyed this session. Hopefully you enjoyed it live, and hopefully you enjoy it when you watch it on demand. So thank you for your time in this session and the previous Tech Talks. I'm saying thank you very much and looking forward to see you after the summer break on the YouTube channels of Sven Langenfeld and Manfred Helber for the next Tech Talks. See you there. Have a good time. Bye.